My name is Bobby Stein.
I'm Navera King.
And we're here to tell you a little bit about narrative mentorship. So let's get started. So before I actually get into the details of the program that we actually piloted last year, I'll tell you a little bit about the game that we work on and kind of what our studio's been up to the past few years. So our primary project that we work on at ArenaNet is Guild Wars 2. It was originally released in 2012. Currently has a global user base in North America, Europe, and Asia. And at last public count, we had 11 million players. Once the game came out in the fall of 2012, we supported it with post-release content that was a blend of two different types of things that we were doing. The first thing was living world releases that would come out roughly every few months to support the live game. And these were free releases, so all you had to do was log in and unlock them. And also we had expansions that would be sold for 20 or 30 bucks and would have a campaign of a fixed length. So between those two post-release strategies, we've been able to keep the game basically populated and successful for the past 6.5 years. So the serialized story releases that fall under the Living World umbrella actually kind of loosely emulate a television show where we'll have a serialized story that progresses with every release, and then we'll have an expansion which roughly equates to something like a film where it's a bit smaller and more focused. In between those releases, we'll also support the game with new things and features like raids, fractals, PvP, World v. World, rapid content, which is just adding small bits into the game, microtransaction things like new skins and dyes and things like that, and quality of life improvements. So in short, when we're talking about Guild Wars as a product, it has a very diverse player base because we are a global game. We have people who are playing with their kids. We have adults, retirees. My father is a player, so yeah, we got people in their 70s and 80s who actually play the game, as well as kids who are pretty young. It's a global game with a global audience. So actually everything on this map represents where we have players. If it's filled in with any color, there are players there. The two darkest regions are the ones with our biggest concentrated player bases. Fun fact, actually in Antarctica we have 4 players, so they're very active.
So all this means, it leads us to the importance of storytelling diversity to reach such a global audience. And when we're talking about diversity, we're not just talking about diverse characters in game or diverse ways of dialogue and ways of speaking to represent those people. We're talking about diversity of teams that will bring about more authentically diverse stories. When you have a diverse team, and I'm talking about across demos, we're talking gender, ethnicity, sexuality, generation, neurotypicality, if that's a word, all of those sorts of buckets that would make up the diverse human population, those are the kinds of folks you want to bring to a diverse narrative team. The reason is that the more folks you have represented at your table in your narrative team, the more perspectives, the more authenticity to those stories, and the less fear comes, less fear and more checks and balances. So there's no way to represent everybody within a narrative team. But when you have more diversity, you have folks who have more, they've encountered different stories. There's more likely to be someone who says, hey, that sounds like appropriation. Why don't we go check over here and get a better feedback on the story we're trying to tell. It makes our stories more authentic. And when we're talking about diverse stories, we're talking about dynamically diverse stories. It's the difference between, we can research anything. Google, internet, we can do all of those things, right? We can come up with a story, but a personal point of view is much stronger. It's the difference between hearing about the Civil War with locations of battles and the dates versus a soldier's personal on-the-field remembrances and how engaging that story can be. And that leads us to specificity. Specificity leads to universality. And when I talk about that, there's two sides to the audience coin. There is the A side, the side that's represented on the screen or in the story. It's familiar to them, it represents them themselves, or it is familiar to them in some way, or it's their story. The B side is everyone else, the others. You're not represented on that screen, but if the representation is authentic, you know, even if you're the other. On some subliminal level, even if you can't articulate, you recognize the authenticity, the truth in that story, in that character, in that plot, the groundedness of the world and of the interactions. So, when we talk about both sides of that audience coin, we're talking about a global hunger right now for diversity in stories and representation. New stories, new perspectives. Perfect examples: Black Panther, Get Out, Crazy Rich Asians. Those are all very specific stories told by very specific personality, very specific communities with very specific perspectives. But global audiences ate those stories up, regardless if they saw themselves in it or if they were among the others. And also the new normal is a spectrum of representation within a story. Perfect example, Captain Marvel. So everyone's looking at it's the first female superhero, but if you've seen the movie, there are many women, many diverse people of color mixed in, and no one's like, hey, you know, here's this other person, and it's not called attention's not called to it, but it's strong and it gives a stronger story and an audience that's more engaged. This hunger leads to audience engagement. Engaged, happy players equal profit. That's in case you need a business case for, you know, why diverse staffing is important. There you go.
So the whole concept of mentorship as it was kind of developed on our team was basically we were confronted with a problem. We had, at the beginning of last year, a couple of vacancies in the narrative department. We were looking for a couple of writer narrative designers. And when we opened up the job position and we started getting applications, we started realizing that we were seeing a lot of the same people applying for the job repeatedly. And that's great. I mean, just because someone didn't get a job the first time they applied doesn't mean that they're not qualified. It might just mean that what we were looking for specifically, they didn't have, or there was someone more appropriate for the role. But we started realizing that we had a lot of the same applicants over and over again, and we weren't really seeing a lot of new people come through the pipeline for review. We also started realizing that after talking to some folks about the position, we realized that they were interested in the job, but they didn't bother applying because when they looked at the job requirements, they felt that because they didn't meet every single bullet point, that they would have no chance, and therefore they didn't bother applying. So they were sort of self-selecting themselves out of the candidate pool. And also because those job requirements were a bit heavy, we were asking for people who had experience in television and then also in other media like comics or novelizations or pen and paper. There was a bit of a barrier to entry. We were getting some people who were applying who had really great portfolios and samples, but because they lacked the years on the job that we were looking for, we were actually hiring for a mid-level position, that they just decided not to bother. So these promising candidates, we realized that we were discouraging them and we needed to do something about it. So at the end of the review cycle, we figured, let's take a look at this and figure out if there's a better way to do it. So we figured that mentorship might actually be a good solution to the problem. So if we could provide a career roadmap to the candidates who were promising but maybe not quite ready for the job, we could maybe help prepare them not only for a job with us, but really for a job at any studio in the industry. We felt that getting more people into the mix would ultimately benefit the industry as a whole. We would offer support to those folks and also basically make ourselves available, whether it was during work hours for certain sessions, or just make ourselves available to answer emails if they had questions about any particular thing. Lastly, we wanted the mentorship program to be self-directed. Not everybody coming in was going to be looking for the same thing, and rather than try and manage every person trying to come through the program. We felt that it would be better if we put that responsibility on them. So now that we decided that we wanted to use mentorship as a way for people to kind of get over that hurdle, whether it's to get their first job or just to kind of leverage their own experiences into a new career path, we needed to figure out who we were going to invite to participate. So we set out a couple of guidelines, and they were very simple. We were actually going to open the mentorship program to anybody. So anybody could apply or express interest. But we wanted to also focus on folks who needed a little bit of extra help getting over that hurdle for the first job. So we were looking for people whose voices were underrepresented in game narrative, those who were experiencing financial hardships, didn't have the means to necessarily get the education that is often required for these jobs, and folks who show strength of character, like veterans and folks involved in public service.
To sort of summarize that, everyone who is, when we say underrepresented voices, we really mean not white, not male, cis male heterosexual, that little bucket. So investing in those future storytellers and bringing them to the table is not just about hiring an ArenaNet, like Bobby said. It's also about elevating the industry as a whole. The more really strong storytellers we have out there in games, the better stories we'll have in games, the more engaged people will be in what we're creating.
So now that we had decided to start the program, we needed to reach out to folks. The first thing that we did is actually get back in touch with folks who had applied for the position with us but didn't quite make the cut. We scheduled conference calls with them, kind of explained to them why we felt they weren't quite ready for a job with us, but we then extended the offer to have them participate in the mentorship program. We also polled our professional network. We started asking narrative folk at other companies and asking if they knew of anyone through their network who they could recommend. And lastly, we reached out on social media. If there was anybody whose, conduct and candor and thoughts about narrative design and writing we felt were interesting or promising, we would reach out to them and try and get to know them a little bit better.
So I was one of these people who was looking to break into narrative design and writing for games. Little secret, I'm older than I might look. And so when I was in undergrad, there weren't any creative narrative game development tracks. It just wasn't anything that folks were thinking about. Like maybe if you were in computer engineering, it was something for you, but from a creative writing perspective, it just wasn't there from a storytelling perspective. I was a film student. My first career was as a creative producer and writer in variety TV and video. I had a few years prior to looking to move into games where I was working as developing content for mixed reality, but I didn't have any traditional game writing experience. I had uncredited writing chops and that production creative team experience, but it really wasn't sure how to make the transition. There's no clear roadmap. Everybody says a little bit different, gives you a little bit different type of advice for how to break in, but it's very difficult if you're on the outside to figure out what that track is. What skills that I had, which skills were applicable. I didn't know because every single studio has a different posting for what it is to be a writer narrative designer, a narrative designer. Everybody's terms are different. I couldn't figure out, when everybody says, change your resume to reflect this particular job posting. Well, what in my varied freelance career of more than a decade could be applied for what I was trying to get into. Let's be honest, studios and narrative departments and recruiters, when they're posting something and trying to fill a spot on their team, they don't have time to walk applicants through how to showcase what your skills are and how to tell them that you really should be on their team. So I didn't know what I didn't know, right? I'm a storyteller, but the games industry, that landscape, was really foreign to me, and I needed a map. I was doing informational interviews, but I really wished for the sort of invaluable resource of hands-on training, field apprenticeship, if you will. I needed honest feedback and quality attention from folks who were already in it.
So now that we were committed to doing the program and we had actually reached out to folks, we wanted to actually have a plan of what to do once they showed up. So we decided to focus on 3 major areas that we felt would be most useful to mentees who were trying to market themselves, but then also to us as a team looking to grow. Basically, if we could foster somebody's career development, what would we want to advise them on? So we've broken into 3 categories: screenwriting, just basically writing screenplays or teleplays adapted for games. Narrative design, basically getting people to understand that they are writing not just for linear media, that we have concepts of things like branching, that we often will be partnered with game designers and artists and programmers to represent the story in outside of scenes and cinematics, but also through gameplay. And lastly, career development. A lot of schools don't really give you much coaching when it comes to how to be a good collaborative partner on the job. So we felt that if there was anything that we could do to give people tips and a little bit of direction on how to present themselves in interviews, and also once they were on the job, how to basically be good partners in development, basically to be good advocates for story, but then also to respect partners in adjacent disciplines. So the structure was we would meet once per week. Every Wednesday, the mentees would come in. We would play the game together for about an hour, at which point, various members of staff would answer any questions if people were new to the game that we were making. But then after that session was over, we would spend the next couple of hours doing a variety of things. Some days it would be just a question and answer session if people had something that they wanted to learn more about. We would do lectures or give presentations on various aspects of screenwriting or narrative design. We'd also give feedback either on the scripts that people want to show us or on some projects that they were working on. Lastly, we would periodically give assignments. So at the end of a presentation covering a particular topic, we would ask them to come back for the following week and maybe dissect a narrative moment or a gameplay moment from something that they had been playing and kind of break it apart into its components and talk about if they were to re-engineer it, or if a game director came to them and said, okay, listen, we need to change the sequence. Let's not use a cinematic, but do this through gameplay. Like, what ideas could they bring to the table so that we could get them thinking critically about story delivery in games beyond just the script itself.
Here's a picture of a couple mentees and some of the guys who work at ArenaNet game designers. This is really to show it was a very casual environment a lot of times that fostered that sort of relationship and give and take and asking questions, and also just dialogue, which is very important and also very rare when you're trying to break in.
Yeah, this is actually a photo from a mock.
I'll get to that.
Oh yeah, sorry, that's coming up. Spoiler. So the end goal that we wanted was to provide career guidance for the mentee, give them advice and help with their portfolio development. If they came to us with a portfolio, we'd give them feedback on how to strengthen it. And a lot of that would come based on what jobs they were actually looking to get. Someone's portfolio might look different if they were going for a pure narrative design job versus a pure writing job. So we wanted to kind of educate them on the differences so that they could scale their samples accordingly, and also just provide ongoing support as they needed it.
So my experience coming in, as I mentioned, I'd been doing informational interviews and sort of mining my network as much as possible to try to figure out, who to talk to who's already doing the job or something above the job that I really wanted to do. And through that, I was introduced to Tom Abernathy, who's our studio narrative director, and Bobby, One of the first things that they asked me for once they told me about the program was a couple of writing samples, preferably a teleplay if I had one, but something that I thought represented my range and my abilities so that they could kind of see where I was at. In addition, Bobby sent me a self-assessment to fill out. And the beauty of this is that it got us on the same page. I was able to say, here are what I believe my strengths are, what I feel very comfortable in, and here are the weaknesses that I know that I have, even in general, in terms of those 3 buckets, screenwriting, narrative, design, and career development. So for me, it set the tone and set expectations for what this program was going to provide. It also set the feeling of a safe space to not know. I think a lot of people in underrepresented groups, what folks don't understand is that they always feel that you need to put your very, very, very best foot forward. Like, I know I'll fake it till I make it. You know what I mean? And so when you do that, yes, it'll help you get in sometimes, but it also doesn't, in a mentorship program where you're supposed to be learning and taking away all of the benefits, being comfortable and saying, I just don't know about this is really important. So setting that tone from the outset was great. For me personally, I was missing that game development, narrative design side. I had some screenwriting, even though it was nice to get more honest feedback on how I was doing, and I wasn't green in terms of my professional career. The other thing was that I came into the program several weeks behind the other mentees. I mention this because it speaks to the agility of a program like this, that I was able to jump in and still get a lot out of it. It was about the quality of the time that I spent with Bobby and Armand Constantine, our narrative design lead, and a couple of other people. It was about the quality of time, not the quantity of time. So one of the things when I first started, I did the narrative design lectures like Bobby was mentioning. He had some one-on-ones with me to catch me up on the lectures he'd given. The nice thing about this is that they were structured, but they were also very organic. So if there was something that I was like, okay, I get, X, Y, but Z over here, let's dig into that. Give me more examples. Let me ask more questions. Let me really deep dive. I did the group sessions with other mentees. The great thing about that is that if you have a diverse group of mentees at different walks of life, career life, they're going to bring different points to the table and ask different questions, and the dialogue will be a lot richer. So instead of having a bunch of, having my cohort be everyone just like me, it was much nicer to have that diversity within the group as well. We did things like I broke story for we were pitching, an episode of Guild Wars 2. And so I got to break a story for the one that I really wanted to do, with our narrative design lead. I got to pitch it, have a pitch session with a contingent of the narrative design team, and it was real. It was like, let's poke some holes in this. How would we fix this? It was a session like I would have gotten if I had been staff already. I had a collaborative time one-on-one with one of the game designers. You saw that photo with several game designers. But first we were paired off with a game designer as if we were the two working on an episode. And we worked through what would the player experience be. All of the things, the questions that are going to come from a game designer that a writer's not necessarily going to be thinking of. If your background's just writing, it gave me that give and take that I wouldn't have gotten from a book. So that, and then we had, in addition to being paired with that game designer, we had one of the game designers pretend to be the game director, and he showed up and was like, well, now let me throw some, monkeys into the wrenches into the monkey, whatever. I'm making words up. I'm a writer. So the 3 things that really come out of that is that you get honest feedback. That is invaluable to someone looking to break in. You're getting real world scenarios, and you're being challenged. And those challenges highlighted for me which skills I had in my backpack that I could utilize and where my weaknesses were and what I needed to learn and really double down on. So, Bobby mentioned support earlier. Support is a resource. Support is a resource that many underrepresented groups that we mentioned, they lack. Support and encouragement gave me the confidence and the authority to bring my talents to the table. More empowered voices are going to elevate our industry as a whole in narrative.
So, how did it go? All right, I'll tell you. So, the program actually went for roughly 6 months. It sort of formed organically, and we started looking at creating it in January, but it really didn't get going until about February. Lasted roughly 6 months until July. We had 6 total participants who came in at various stages. About half of them made it through the entire time, or basically performed what we figured was completing the major assignment, which was pitching an episode, coming up with an outline, working with a designer on what the narrative design would be, and then doing a draft of the script of the Golden Path. And we made one hire at the end. We just, our success story. You know, all the mentees who participated were great and definitely brought really wonderful experiences to the program and hopefully walked away with them. But Novira, I think, from her work in television and also in what was it, AR and VR development, was able to pick up on a lot of these things pretty quickly. So she was.
It's because I'm old.
Moving on. So what next? So we actually think that the program was a success, even though only half of the participants actually made it through to the end. So what we want to do is learn from our experiences and try and revise it and try it again. So the first thing that we actually did was we looked inward and we started doing an internal version of the program. So if there were folks who were already working at the company in either in adjacent disciplines or just elsewhere in the company, but not in narrative, we would encourage them to come to these sessions. Sometimes they had the desire or expectation or goal of actually moving into narrative at some point, and others just actually wanted to understand more about the discipline, so that if we were partnered together, it would be a much smoother process. So we had a lot of game designers who actually would come, learn a lot more about breaking story for serialized or episodic content, and basically kind of involve them in things so that they would learn more about our discipline. And the great side effect is we would learn more about their discipline, so we would end up being better partners with each other. We also decided to add networking to the career development. A lot of times people either are naturally good networkers or they're not. We figured that since it was so important for people's employment, future forward.
Especially in games.
Yeah, exactly.
More so than
a lot of times people will get work through the people who they know. So we decided to add that in. We also wanted to make sure that we were supporting people outside the group sessions. So we did group sessions only because we didn't have enough people who could dedicate one-on-one time to everybody who wanted to participate. And when we actually brought the program internally, it was even more lopsided. Basically, we only had a few people who were able to dedicate any of their time to the program and a lot of people interested. So we would typically have conversations where it was myself and maybe one other person from the narrative team and like 15 people from adjacent disciplines showing up. So there's just no way we can devote a significant amount of time to everybody. But outside of those sessions, if people had 15 minutes or a half hour to just talk, or if they just sent us a link, hey, listen, I wrote this, would you mind giving me some feedback? Well, then if we had free time in our day, we would look at that and give them a little bit of our time.
Another thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Another thing we're going to be doing is partnering with outside studios. So calling back to what I said about how every studio does narrative design and writing differently, exposing mentees to a range of positions and mentorship will actually, again, help them become better candidates and elevate the industry.
Yeah. So if actually you are working at a studio and you're interested in learning more about our experiences or developing a program for yourself, or if you're in the Seattle area and you want to partner with us, one of the things we had talked about is maybe mentees spending a few days at our studio and then maybe going to a different studio to see how the writer narrative designer job is different from place to place. And a lot of that will be dependent on the project or the job, but we feel that it could be a very good opportunity for people to kind of broaden their horizons. So thank you for coming. And we'd like to give a special thanks to the folks listed over here. They either participated in the program or they helped us develop it. And without their help, we wouldn't be up here today. So special thanks to them. And if you would like to contact us outside of this, there's our information. So thank you very much.
Thanks. We don't have to vacate this room, so if you do have questions, we have a few more minutes to chat. No questions? Any questions?
And if you're shy, we could always talk about it out in the hall.
Don't be shy. We won't bite. We promise.
Hi.
Hi.
So I guess I am a more general designer that's not actually working in narrative at the moment, but I would like to be. My studio doesn't offer as many opportunities to do that. What are things that I should be doing to, be able to work more towards that direction?
Sure. Okay. So you're a game designer and you're interested in learning more about narrative, so to open up career opportunities and also partner with narrative. Is that correct?
Yes.
Sure. One of the things that I would recommend, there's a lot of ways you could do it, right? I think probably talking to some folks and networking would be a good place to start, because depending on specifically what you're looking to learn, it might actually, you might get different advice depending on who you're talking to. There are a few books we can recommend. I guess my question is, are you looking at developing like serialized story or something that's very cinematic in nature, or are you looking at something that's more like gameplay focused?
Probably more gameplay focused.
Okay. Let's talk after this, because I'd like to learn a little bit more about your situation. But I think probably the the simplest takeaway from this is talk to some people who might work at studios with projects that might align with what you're looking to learn, and we could probably get you paired up with somebody who might be able to shed a little bit more light on that. I know some people who are a bit more systems focused in narrative versus other people who are a little bit more screenwriting focused, and depending on what you're looking for, we can make a different recommendation for you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Go ahead, you were.
Hi, thanks for this talk. I have the obvious question. If I or someone I know would be interested in participating in the next round of the mentorship program, what would be the appropriate channel to get involved in that?
Okay, so you're asking if you want to participate in our mentorship program, how you
Yes.
would go about that. Okay. So the initial plan was to actually have an application process ready to go today so that we could announce it, and it would have been grand, and we would have been happy, and unfortunately we did not, so that didn't come together. So I can't point you to a website to apply. But what I am hoping to do is, once we finish the internal mentorship program that we're running right now, start up another external one, and what we would likely do is post it on the same website where we would post our jobs, and it would just be, the reason we would do it that way is just because we already have an established system for fielding applications. And then this way people could submit not only their resume or a cover letter. And by the way, for something like this, it's very important that you have a cover letter, because just seeing the things that you've done doesn't really tell us anything about who you are. We really want to know a little bit more about you and your outlook on narrative, but then also what you're looking for. We would also want to look at a portfolio so that we could kind of gauge what your strengths were, and then if it was a good match, then we could continue the conversation. So,
I would also say,
yes,
following Bobby on Twitter is a really good way to find out about anything that we're doing in terms of mentorship or job openings in narrative. You're really good at sharing that information, and also free advice, like constantly. So I'm just gonna throw that out
this
there.
might not be good advice, but it is free, so
It's free.
take it for what
It's
it's
okay.
worth.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey guys, great chat.
Hi.
I'm Blair Leggett with One More Story Games, and the question I have for you guys is the kind of technology you were using to assess these candidates or work with them or iterate through that. Were you using particularly in-house tools with ArenaNet? Was it paper mock-ups or
Oh, sure.
maybe Twine or something else like that? How did you find that and how effective that was?
Okay, cool. So you're asking if there were any tools or processes that we were using in the mentorship program to help with the coaching process.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay.
So it was a lot of paper, to be honest. There were some things like showing us what the narrative design docs looked like internally that Bobby would often put up on a screen. But because every studio might have different tools, the sessions weren't about learning that set of tools. It was more about, these are some of the things that you might need to think about, or depending on your studio, might need to learn. You'll have to learn a tool, et cetera. So the paper works a lot better, especially, and conversations about what is in your narrative design, what's supposed to happen next, what is the gameplay, and just kind of walking through it that way.
And just even being able to assess it, because sometimes you can have something on paper which can be very effective, but as a review tool, that doesn't always necessarily work. So just wondering what you found with that.
Yeah, so we, internally when we're developing an episode, we'll use a combination of like off-the-shelf stuff and then proprietary things, right? But so for example, when the writers are writing a draft of the script, they're usually going to do it in Final Draft, or they might do something in Word. But we have a template that we use in Word that emulates screenplay format. So that's usually a good, quick way to write a golden path for review. As far as what we would expect from a narrative design document, we have kind of a loose template that we would share with people and just say, hey, try and give us something that looks roughly like this. And really, it was more about, we need to see this kind of information being conveyed. And often what happened was we would get documents that were overly detailed in the wrong spots. So we would ask them to start very high level, summarize things, use log lines, get good with an elevator pitch. Because when you're pitching an idea to a game director or a narrative director, the last thing you want to do is overwhelm them with detail. You really need to keep it very simple. So that was kind of the overriding message that we were trying to impart.
I would also say that the game designers at ArenaNet are surprisingly narrative savvy. So if it's, this would go back to our idea of partnering with other studios. If it's a studio where the tool is important to learn, that's something that mentees should be exposed to as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. When we talk about inclusion, especially in game narrative, we always talk about culture and age and gender. But what about language? Is that still a big barrier not to be a native English speaker?
I don't know if it's, I would say that anything that is outside of normal is always something of a barrier, right? I would also say that the inclusion of localization, and if you have a global audience, how we're localizing an English script for Guild Wars 2, we're constantly talking to our German translation team and our folks who are doing Chinese and our folks who are doing Spanish and trying to see if does this concept translate. So I would say that there is something extraordinarily beneficial about having someone on a narrative team who is not a native English speaker, or English is their second or third or fourth language. The way that you think, the way that you come at story is really impacted by your first language as well. So I would highlight it as a pro, not a con when you're trying to reach out.
Yeah, we have, I think we localize in 5 languages. And actually, I think folks who come up through localization and move over to narrative, I think that's probably a pretty good training ground, because the way that we work with our localization team, they're in-house. And what we started doing is including them in table reads. We started writing up episode summaries and giving it to them, character bios, things like that. Because what we found was it would cut down on the questions that they would ask us later in development, or when they would go to the studio and record in other languages. If they were involved in the story development earlier, it just meant that they were more connected to it. And I think if your goal is ultimately to tell stories, even if English isn't your first language, but you're a competent writer, I think that could work to your advantage depending on the scenario.
Absolutely.
Novera, you had to come in to handle an established IP. How did you prepare for this? Or if it was covered during the mentorship, what did you learn?
So because I was coming in so many weeks late, I doubled down on the research. The beauty of Guild Wars 2 is that the fans have put together a wiki that is ridiculous. So I spent like 36 consecutive hours, something. I was like, okay, I'm gonna be up, I'm just gonna read about all the things, and sort of got a feeling for the game, and also for the characters and the types of stories that I could tell. But because it was going to be a spec script that was never actually going to be in the game, there was a bit of leeway. What we were really trying to do is get to the point where it was a cohesive, strong game story. So I could use research to give myself enough of the landscape of the world and then populate it with a bunch of original characters.
Cool.
Thank you.
I have 3 questions. Firstly, did you do this with the support of your company? And how was that for you, either way? Are you the only mentorship program at the company, or are there disciplines involved in this? And then have you given any thought to how a remote-based mentorship program would work?
Sure, those are all great questions. So I may ask for a reminder. I got like a goldfish memory, so apologies. Let's see. So the first question was,
Did we have support?
did we have support? Yes, I had kind of the blessing in as much as I just went and did it. My boss was supportive of it, and a lot of people said, oh, that sounds neat, and then that was about it. So I kind of just kept pushing on it. And thankfully, I think we were, at that time, fully staffed to where I could actually dedicate a few hours every week to developing the program. I mean, I don't come from a teaching background, so even though this, is not a school, it's not meant to emulate a classroom, I definitely wanted to look at educational course planning as kind of a starting point. As long as this didn't get in the way of my regular work, nobody bothered me about it. And I think once people started seeing the value of it, they started getting more supportive in that sometimes people would actually start volunteering to help. They would come to some sessions, and like Novira was saying before, when it came time to partnering with game designers to kind of simulate the pitch process or the narrative design process or the story breaking process, we actually had other professionals in adjacent disciplines who were helping us with it. Currently, I don't believe there is another mentorship program in our building. I have been approached by people in a couple of different departments, like in design and in programming. Mm-hmm. So there is definitely interest, but it is up to the leads or directors in those departments to develop them. But I wouldn't be surprised if more of the departments started doing it, because I think they've seen enough benefit to feel like it's a worthwhile endeavor. And lastly, I guess the question was
a remote base.
Remote. Yeah, that's actually something we've thought about a bit. We didn't do it for the first class only because we felt that it was hard enough just to get a program going, that trying to also juggle remote was going to be an additional layer of challenge to it. Totally open to it, and I think we probably would have to do, if not a fully remote program, but at least accommodate for people who are not on site. So we're looking into it. We just haven't really done much with that yet.
And I do think that if we can grow programs like this and partner with other companies, that there's going to come a time where, when we're partnering with other companies, if one of the companies is in Seattle and some of the mentees are in Seattle and then they have remote, in LA or vice versa or something like that, I think it's a natural and very organic progression for a program like this to become remote.
Thank
But
you.
not yet.
Soon.
Soon. That's a threat. Hi.
Hi. I just have a quick question when it comes to portfolio pieces and examples. I have applied to a lot of different places, and some ask for prose examples, some ask for screenwriting examples. Although, just in your opinion, which is kind of the better sample to have? Is screenwriting or prose?
So The answer to that question will depend on what company you're applying to and what game they're making. The reason that I clarify it that way is we always like to see teleplays. I personally like to see a teleplay because they're a fixed length. Usually, you know, I like to see something that's like, hey, this is a spec episode for a 30-minute show. It's going to be 23 to 30 pages, right? So I can probably get through that in a half hour, 45 minutes. And I can see somebody's thought process in terms of setting up and paying off a story. They'll break it into 3 acts. You know, it's very structured, and I can get a good sense of what a person's chops are, right? Sure, we'll read longer samples. I'll read screenplays, and sometimes people will send, you know, excerpts from their books. But there's no way I'm going to read like a 300-page novel. And even if I only just read a section of it, unless that section actually was an entire act, I'm not going to get what I need to see out of it. Some companies may really be looking for that, though, right? So that's why I don't tell anybody, oh, don't do this or don't do that, or make sure you have an Excel spreadsheet with barks in it or something. Like, it's going to be very different. So I think what's important, and this actually falls on the employers who are looking for people, they should clarify what they're looking for. One thing that I realized after the last time we had a job posting was we were kind of opaque about what we were looking for, and it wasn't until we would request samples that we might be a little more specific. You know, we should just put it on the job description to be like, we would like to see this of this length. You know, and it doesn't have to be something like, for us, we don't need to see something in the Guild Wars universe. In fact, I'd prefer to not see that because I just want to get a sense of your storytelling techniques. And a lot of people, when they are applying for a job at a studio that does a fantasy game, they get all Fakespeare on you. And they're sending this thing in that is just kind of really hard to read and not at all what we're looking for. So find out what the studio is looking for. Either try and write something toward a game that you already know they've developed, or just ask and say, hey, listen, I can write something up for you, or I have samples in a variety of genres. What would you like to see? And then tailor it for them, because you're probably not going to send the same batch of content to every company, and it's better to give them what they want than to guess.
Yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit to that because my portfolio was kind of like, I don't know, I don't want to say a hot mess, but there was a lot of stuff in there. And every informational interview I was having, they were saying something different about what they would like to see. I heard twine, do a twine. I heard, you know, tell a play, say that you finished your novel, you know, all of these kinds of things. So my advice would be, instead of posting your portfolio with all of your different kinds of samples, have, you know, a bucket of a few different things that you've done that you're proud of, so that, to Bobby's point, when you find out what that particular job posting wants, you can pull out the best samples and show it to them, because every single group is a little bit different.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you.
Got to make up for the people who aren't here. Come on.
Right.
Get rowdy.
This is the party room.
I'm going to be participating in a mentorship thing this week. I don't know who actually sponsors it. I don't know if it's IGDA or something, but I was asked to participate in some Q&A sessions. So if you look, I believe there are some signups still left. I think there's like Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday in the afternoon, like 4 to 5 or 2 to 3 or something like that. So if you're interested in attending and asking more questions, that's fine. Or you can just hit me up on Twitter or, you know, LinkedIn or whatnot. Anyway, thank you so much for
Thanks for
coming.
staying, guys.